the swag on. Get the swag on.
So, bit of context, I've been messing around with interactive stuff for 20 years, and I've been making products for 10 years. And I've learned a few things. I'm going to share a few of the things that I think are really important with you tonight. So I'd call this Truth Talks. It's usually money talks and bullshit walks, but it's just truth talks, because that's what I believe, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Poke and quite a lot about my product businesses as kind of expressions of how my beliefs kind of play out when I'm in control of something small rather than fighting a big corporation to make them do interesting things. But to give a bit of Poke context, this is what we believe. We make better things, and we make things better. And what we mean by that is, sometimes people don't have anything interesting to talk about, and then you need to make something awesome, or they have something already that they're not very good at kind of articulating or exploiting or leveraging, and we help them do that. It's as simple as that. That's what digital does, by the way. That's probably why we're all here. We're exploiting those same opportunities. How that plays out in Poke, and the beginning of really the theme of the discussions, the theme of the presentation tonight, is really about storytelling and communication in the broadest sense of the word. So not communication in terms of advertising, but communication in the sense of anything that communicates. And of course, we know that everything communicates. So as an agency, when we're looking at technology, we're very kind of clear about that when clients come to us and they know they need to communicate to their customers, potential customers, we kind of look at everything in the mix. Again, that's what the startup community tend to do, kind of pick off something that the big corporations haven't identified and make something useful out of it. This is just one tiny kind of glimpse of what that means in practice. So this is Mulberry. It's a UK kind of luxury-ish brand. They make beautiful handbags. They came to us to work with them for their whole digital presence, the digital real estate, e-commerce, social content, etc. And obviously they want to communicate luxury. So you look at most luxury brands, they have a good aesthetic expression in digital, but when you actually start to interact with those services, it starts to get pretty rotten pretty quickly. So our concept was really simple, which is just to flip it and say, actually, if you're a luxury brand and you really care about your customer who has a lot of money but they don't have a lot of time, then you put it the other way around and say, well, the service side of it and particularly the checkout process, if you make that awesome, if you make that really considered, and you compress 6-7 stage checkout process into one page with inline error checking, then your customers are going to feel really well served. They're going to feel that luxury experience at their fingertips. And we haven't said anything to them. It's not in the copy. It's not in the visual arrangement. It's simply in the amount of attention and consideration that has gone into resolving the cause and effect, the feedback. So here's a little red thing. I haven't put my postcode in yet. These things have gone yellow, which have already done a check and an affirmative. So immediately you're getting confidence all the way through. And it's so seamless, you don't even know it's happened. But when you come to buy something again, your preference will be to chase through their own retail channel, and obviously they'll take 50% more revenue every time they do that. So it has, and I think so it touches on another thing, which we think is really important. I'm sure you guys think is very important as well. Things don't tend to be in the real world either a communication problem or a service problem or a transactive problem. They tend to be all of those things at the same time. And the more that you can work with those things all at the same time, the better. As simple as that. So in this case, we're doing a better brand job. We're communicating those values more effectively in a context that people least expect it and therefore create the greatest differentiation. And we're creating preference. So we're doing lots of things that kind of advertising might encourage you to do, but very inefficiently by just layering those things into a single view. And this thing does it in a similar way, so we helped to launch the Huffington Post in the UK, and one of the defining aspects of the Huffington Post is how viral virulent the community is, and it's really a brand that's defined by conversation, It's much less of a kind of static news channel with comments. It's the whole thing is a commentary. So when we launched them, we felt like, rather than going out and talking too much about and making claims about what this thing is, let's make the launch in itself a conversation, and let's try and leverage the elements that we have in the mix at launch. So so what we did was we created the gauge, which was just a way of kind of putting more emphasis on this idea of discussion by really polarizing it and saying and really talking about just where people fell on particular issues. One of the things the Huffington Post did was obviously sign up a bunch of bloggers to start with, but then we had the general blogosphere as well. So all the gauge did was it just encouraged those guys to participate in the gauge, and then by those guys participating, the general blogosphere also participated. That interaction then informed the gauge number, which became this reference point on where the population. So it was a daily kind of polling vehicle that then became quoted and requoted and requoted in the press. So again, rather than going out there with a kind of an ad, we're creating content that is itself much more virulent, much more potent, and that is constantly reinforcing the core of the Huffington Post brand. So it's wrapping, it is opportunity to wrap those things up and do them all simultaneously through design, storytelling, and whatnot. Anyway, so those are just a couple of examples of the poke work to give some context there. But as I said, most of the time we're dealing with really big organizations and trying to handhold them towards the progressiveness, and that progressiveness is something that really feels like it comes much more from this space. So it's much more of a struggle. But there's a couple of good examples where clients have been receptive to that thinking. Thinking about this narrative between the startups, the disruptors, and the old guard, I think it's very easy to be to kind of latch on to or focus too much on some aspects of this kind of David and Goliath story that we're very familiar with. I mean, obviously, technologies, methodologies, attitude, culture, the fact that entrepreneurs will work a lot harder and longer because the incentives are much greater and all these things. They feel like they're the reason why this thing is working, maybe. There's obviously some efficiency gains by attacking problems in much more efficient, effective ways, etc., etc. But there's also something on a story and expression and communication layer that I think is really, really important in the success and this kind of this big narrative that we're seeing at the moment. And I think what it is, it's about storytelling. It's about purity. It's about really being able to stand for something in a way that established companies cannot do. And the reason for that is, most companies that occupy the consumer space have relied very heavily on really broadcast media to talk about what they do and what they're about. And really the fight, the battlefield was one that was taking place in a very, very narrow space, very controlled and very expensive. But if you won your battles there, then you won the hearts of consumers. And of course, in the last 20 years, that grit, that narrowness has been eroded, and what we have is a huge network of people, comparing notes on everything. And subsequently, the truth has become not only more important, but it's become much more available. And I think that you see that everywhere, not just in the startup community. You see it in craft trends and all these things. You see it in the environment around us. People are concerned about authenticity and truths, and that's something that's really that we have a great advantage in. So this is the first of my little product stories, and this happened 10 years ago. So how that played out in telephones, or what happened with telephones, was they were new, they were exciting, everybody started manufacturing them, and then there was a race, but everything that was produced and every brand that was created was built on the same assumption, which is people wanted more functions, more features in a smaller phone. So that just continued for 10 years, 10, 15 years. And as a kind of joke, I mean, it's very much a hacky thing. I put this phone together, which I bought off eBay and rewired and plugged into a mobile phone. So you see them everywhere now. They make millions of pounds. We don't make we got ripped off so many times that we didn't turn a massive profit on it. But here I am in the New York Times 10 years ago, and we made this product, which was really a reaction to those market conditions, that environment where our assumption is always that the physical things on the shelves, things in the shops, are answering a genuine consumer need, right? That they are consumer-centric merely because they've kind of earned their place on a shelf. They must be answering something. And yet what we've seen with mobile phones, just as one example of a kind of technology, it continued to get smaller and smaller and smaller and more complicated. And it created this incredible opportunity to do something that really had its roots in Marcel Duchamp, because I was an art student. So this is this worked really well. We set up a business, and we were selling in 75 countries overnight with a team of 3 of us, and I was doing this in the evenings as well as running my agency. So these are the products we ended up making. Just in the same way that I was showing the interfaces from Poke, we're still looking for every single thing that we were doing on a product level, on a physical product level, as a way of telling stories, as a way of constantly reinforcing what we're about, why we existed. So this is a one-off we made with a sustainable hardwood. It's a Bluetooth pip. So again, it's about, it's like, this is probably 9 years old. And then we made a little pot of wax that you could wax your phone and bring the luster up again. A really, really simple gesture. But what it enabled us to talk about was our product business as a reaction to the built-in obsolescence of all the products around us. So just in that same way that most startups, most new businesses take a kind of a counter position to the old guard. We were doing the same thing here, but it was more poetic. It's interesting to see that in terms of storytelling, we've gone from a point in the cat food example where you have a very boring, undifferentiated product, and then you differentiate through storytelling and through making films and making adverts. Now this is actually one of a whole bunch of Kickstarters which haven't even been made. So they raised they reached their target, they doubled their target, and they still didn't actually make the thing. So we've almost gone full circle. Obviously, what we need to do as businesses is balance those forces. It's easy to think that it's just a startup thing and that only startups get this right, and yet the examples around us. I mean, Steve Jobs is the obvious one. And even though he gets quoted all the time, and you've seen a million pictures and you've heard the Apple story a million times, the purpose of showing it here is that they were really the masters of, and the ones who are able to scale the most, where you can't identify where the story is happening because it's everywhere, because it's right across the chain. If you think about all these launches, what they're about, this isn't, it's a guy in a black shirt showing a product. It's so kind of old school. But these are the things that these got quoted on the front page of newspapers for 5 years when these product launches were made. They weren't marketing events. They were global news events. Why was that? Why was their story so compelling? Why was it considered to be news rather than just an ad? And the reason is that the story and the product and the service and the quality of interaction and what they were about made them transcend the category. The reason for that is that people don't buy the what, they buy the why. And you see it with Steve Jobs with his presentations every time. He doesn't hold the thing up and say, this looks cool, these are all the things it does. Every single feature, every single function addresses a need, addresses a problem, addresses something that wasn't currently in the market. And it was really interesting with my phone product. People loved it until the smartphone came along, until the iPhone came along, because really Steve Jobs made people fall in love with their phones again. He answered all the things that were wrong about what was happening in the phone category, and obviously we've never looked back. It's just more launches, more launches, more launches. Where it goes wrong is where those motives kind of decouple. And I think, Nike Fuel is one of the really good examples of a kind of marketing-driven, functional story. But the problem with Nike Fuel is that it just wasn't resolved. It was kind of defined from a marketing point of view, and it wasn't robust as a tool. So people might be using them and talking about them in the kind of marketing space, but they weren't being used in gyms because none of the trainers knew what Nike points were about. So it's really easy to get it wrong from the product point of view as well. And I think when you think about Apple, even when you think about IKEA, which I think is another great example, where the whole chain is considered, the whole proposition is considered everywhere, in retail, in product. The price and the economics are considered under a microscope because they're considered part of the experience, part of the storytelling, part of the brand, just as the retail experience is. But when you see it done beautifully, it's incredibly powerful, and obviously those examples kind of prove that. Another example you're probably very familiar with, and something that I love because we're kind of operating in this category, is Tesla, because what Tesla have done is, in a physical product, they haven't just created a beautiful car, they've created an icon. They've created a symbol which is much more powerful. The way that you create a symbol is standing for something. And again, it's back to what I was saying earlier about, locating the kind of the truth of a brand and making everything you do about that, making that inform every single step that you take. Now Tesla, what they did for us, what they did for the world, is to say, we're never going to be excited about energy-efficient cars if they're not sexy. We're never going to adopt these technologies if they're not macho, if I don't feel good about getting in that car and driving it around and feeling like I'm going to impress my friends. It's just a matter of fact. So, we can get whipped with Hessian as much as you want. We're not going to change our behavior. So what they did was they gave us something that allowed us to resolve that conundrum that we have, to be responsible consumers and to project our identity through something that we're comfortable with. And so, what it means to us is more than just a beautiful car. It's a symbol for that unlocking, that enablement of our progression to be better human beings, basically. You contrast that with Chevrolet. So this is the Volt. I mean, everybody has an electric car now, of course, and they can't draw the power from their truth because they also do this thing, which is 20 kilometers a gallon, a gas guzzler. So they can't, there's contradictions inherent in the whole organization, and it corrupts their story. It also means that they're defined as being a kind of generalist car maker. Tesla, obviously, in overcoming this range anxiety problem that comes as inherent in electric cars, and also, again, on a symbolic level, something that's really used as a kind of anti-electric propaganda, because range anxiety is something that affects our masculine desire to jump in our car and drive all night long to somewhere, wherever the hell we want. That's a part of it. It's kind of a part of the dream of the automobile, is that freedom. So recognizing that, Tesla are creating an infrastructure, and who knows, in 5 years' time, they're probably going to be a power company, not a car company. And actually, it doesn't matter, because where they come from is about solving a kind of problem in a really elegant way, using design to do that. But they're overcoming a much, much bigger problem. But we're on that journey with them. Now, Chevrolet couldn't do that. Although maybe they could do it in terms of resources, but it wouldn't be part of their story because they don't have that. They don't have it baked into their brand. They don't have it baked into their story. So we did the phones, and the phones went like that, and then they went like that. And as it was going like that, we came up with an idea, which we actually thought was a much more interesting idea than the phones, which was this sort of, again, this like weird Duchamp idea, reaction to the market conditions, but didn't have a really deeper truth. And what was interesting, and the reason why I show you Tesla, is it's kind of pretty much a parallel story to that. So this is, when we started, we entered the market when pretty much it was like Tesla, everything, and you had, low energy alternatives, but they were all really uninspiring. So the mainstream, bulb manufacturers had taken, just like the mobile phone companies had basically taken one trajectory, one direction, with one set of assumptions about what consumers wanted in the mainstream. And what they felt people wanted was faster horses, the old Ford adage. They just wanted their light bulbs to change the least. Even though the underlying technology with compact fluorescent and LEDs, which is an emerging technology in lighting, but fundamentally different technologies. So we thought that was weird, and actually the same story was true as is in the Tesla case, which is you either use something gorgeous with a lovely color and visually lovely, or you use something horrible with a horrible color, but then you feel good about yourself because you're a responsible consumer. But you can't have both. That didn't exist. You couldn't have both. And then because of I studied sculpture, and I was very familiar with what artists have been doing with neon for decades and decades. There was no shortage of artists using light in a really magical way. I mean, light is magical. So it just seemed so odd to us that every single manufacturer in the world was creating this same, working from this same format when all these things existed. So we made a £150 prototype from neon, because we'd been copied so much with our phones. I mean, we lost the business basically to copies. We decided to throw the Far East off the scent by doing something a bit crazy, but at the same time lodging an idea. So these were early prototypes. And then this is what we launched in 2010, which we billed as the world's first designer low energy light bulb. So we knew right at the conception point that the importance of the narrative of this company. So we were here with the world's first designer low energy light bulb. Just like Tesla, we knew that there was an opportunity to grab that symbolic status, because we weren't just a cool looking light bulb, we were the answer to this conundrum. We were another signal to people that they could progress in their lives and consume beautiful things and feel better about it. So it's a real parallel to what Tesla are doing. This is the Plumen 2 we launched on Kickstarter this year. And when we consider what our strategy is, so it's just like I was saying before, we tend to work with, in Poke, we work with big organizations with big communication strategies. And with Plumen, obviously, it's a startup. We started from nothing. We started from a 150 quid neon tube, and we're still bootstrapped, by the way. How do you plan that narrative, and how do you structure it? So everything really flowed from this. So this line came at the time when we created that neon prototype. So isn't it strange that the bulb, an object so synonymous with ideas, is almost entirely absent of imagination? So we knew this conundrum existed. And we also knew that the light bulb, of course, was a symbol for ideas. And we felt that there was a really interesting contrast between this symbolic status of the light bulb and the truth, which was the reverse. It was the opposite. And again, my artistic sentiment was very, my artistic sensibility was very responsive to that. I felt like, that gets people on the hook. That gets people interested. But it's more than that. It also gives us a reason. It gives us a purpose. It gives Plumen, the company, a purpose. So this is now 7 years ago, and that purpose is about reversing that problem, which is about putting the imagination into the light bulb. It's obvious. So that's what we're about. We're about looking at technology and lighting, looking at all this emerging technology, and doing the opposite to all the other manufacturers, which is just trying to make the least amount of difference with all these different technologies. We go the reverse and say, what are the wonderful, exciting, beautiful, cool things that this technology offers, and how can we package and build something around that, which we're doing across the board. When it comes to actually marketing and communicating the story, then how do we get that out there? One thing we knew we had to do if we wanted to claim this kind of world's first designer low energy light bulb was we knew we had to make it really wild. It had to be quite quite noisy, quite visually arresting, because we needed to get people's attention. We knew that if we were the first to do that, by the way, that people would talk about it, they would link to it, and therefore anybody putting designer, low energy light bulb, designer bulb, would come to us, and they do. If you look at Google and any of those terms, we're ranked #1. So we had to make it wild, but by making it wild, we also made it difficult. So not everybody could, if these fittings, it's not necessarily going to go in here. It's not going to look great in everything you put it in. For traditional marketing, that's the problem. For us, it's an advantage, actually. Because, first of all, we get the opportunity to create a new vernacular, a new language. But the other thing is, this is something that, one of my obsessive things, I'm sure you all like are stats junkies and, whatever channel you're sitting on to see if anybody's said anything about you, pressing refresh on Google to see if your business has been mentioned. My obsession is looking for hashtags for Plumen and seeing what people have done with it. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and somebody's posted some cool thing, and this is one of them. This is just a girl up in north of England, and she's done something really, really great with it. What that is something, I don't know if you've heard about the IKEA effect, but when people, IKEA is not just brilliant because they managed to get the costs right down and get it into a tiny pack, so it's super efficient for transportation and storage and everything. But it also means when people make the thing, they have a much deeper attachment to that object than if they just bought it off the shelf and it was shipped cold, because they've invested themselves in it. And that's, for us, that's a great thing. Marketeers spend millions of pounds trying to force relationships. And actually what happens with IKEA and what we're doing is turning that disadvantage, that difficulty, into a creative process on a part of the buyer and the user, and that translates into a stronger relationship. They become a part of the brand, and actually they're changing the brand. It costs us about £300,000 to create a new model. So that model has to stay the same until we've sold hundreds of thousands of it to wash its face. So all of these things that happen, they become part of the story, actually. And the great thing about these interactions are they're new stories every single day, and every new story creates a new possibility, creates a new piece of inspiration, creates a new piece of content. So I don't know how many people here operate in the kind of agency sector, but content production and social is like a big hot topic. But everybody's sitting there trying to invent what to talk about, and forget that actually what they need to do is look into the organization and say, well, what's interesting about us? Where's our truth? Where's our sort of purpose? And how do we build? How can we design things so that is a natural source of a constant turnover? So this is an example of it on a very, very simple level. It generates content all the time, and that content directly feeds sales, effectively. Every single light bulb that hangs sells another light bulb, effectively. This is a Café Coutume, so this is it's a sort of illustrative as well of, when you're in this kind of, this space, this symbolic space, and other people want to attach to that story. So this is it was a new cafe in Paris, which apparently does amazing coffee, Café Coutume. So apparently, I heard from, there you go, verified. So when they did the coffee shop up, they hung the light bulbs, and this was right at the beginning. This is when they were first available. And then more cafes have done that, and more cafes have done that, and more cafes have done that. And every time, it creates a new, something new and something really exciting. Very interesting. This was one of my moments when Tesla used it in their Frankfurt store, because obviously they just thought there was a nice connection between the two. But again, it's rather than just having a boring, undifferentiated product on the shelf, you're connecting with this whole bigger narrative, and being a part of that means that you're being lifted into those conversations, into those thoughts without any effort, which is kind of what we like. No effort's good. So we kick off that process. These are all just things that have come into Instagram, and various other things. And then, of course, designers also. So you've got the user side of it and what customers throw back to us. But then, what then starts to happen is designers themselves start to consider how can we partner. So I know, obviously, in the startup community, we're very used to this idea of very formal partnerships. So who can we partner with and synergize with? But there's also, this is an example of a much more organic one, which is You know, designers want stories. They want to attach themselves to other stories, and this effect is very natural. So designers use the bulb in that way. This is a shade that was made by the designer we worked with on the bulb, and you know, he opened up another kind of little mini narrative, which is 95% of shades that are produced today are still made to the proportions of incandescence. So they're still made to work with this old technology that's being phased out in every single territory in the world. Why is that? So, you know, work to the proportions of low energy and you have much more beautiful, harmonious objects. So that bulb story starts to extend to accessories, to shades, becomes an interesting topic for designers to riff off. Here's a grey pants. This is a designer called Grey Pants who make shades out of recycled cardboard. So, you know, connections, and those things are happening organically. Just more examples of those. And then even, I mean, this thing, you got us into Crate and Barrel in the States, where it's Paola Navoni, who's an Italian designer, insisted that Crate and Barrel, she created a collection for Crate and Barrel. She insisted that Crate and Barrel photographed her shades with plumins, but they didn't even carry plumins. So now they carry plumin in order to showcase it with their shades. So, you know, in terms of tangible business value, then it also translates. So you know, this isn't all just kind of fluffy stuff happening in the brand level. These are things that are genuine kind of leverage that are, you know, making real difference to our business. And another example of a recent shade. And then we've got involved with shades because we didn't want to do it before because it felt like it was peripheral. And then just like Tesla, looking at the whole experience. So, you know, we're not a car company anymore. We're concerned with the experience of transportation. And then, you know, then you suddenly draw a much bigger circle and you're involved in infrastructure. For us, you know, we wanted to extend the application of the light bulb, so making a shade, I mean, it seems like an obvious thing, making a shade that really complements it seemed like a natural progression. In order for this story to really resonate, it feels like, and I think this is something that our corporate clients really struggle with, is you have to kind of make it real to people and you have to show them that you're committed. I mean, companies don't want to commit. They don't want to commit anymore. They change their marketing directors. They change their directors every 6 months. They're only concerned about what happens in a narrow window, which is another great advantage of the startup community because it's our lives. Our lives and reputations and spirits depend on our ideas. So this is really simple. All of that stuff, you know, about the value of people's input and their images and the ideas that they bring to our brand, we reward them in a really simple way. I mean, obviously, we kind of reward them in social channels and say, lovely thing, brilliant, and make them feel really good about sharing stuff. But we also put someone's picture on our box. You know, every year we choose a new picture and we thank them for it. And it, you know, it means a lot to people when they've done something cool in their bedrooms and now it's on a box of something that's being produced in hundreds of thousands and being experienced all over the world. It's really meaningful. It's nothing for us. And I think the point here is, you know, we're coming from a world where, you know, the exchange and the communication chain was very linear, and you had to put money in at every point, and it generally didn't stick. To a situation where, you know, just from a storytelling point of view, just from a communication point of view, let alone obviously the mechanical connections and partnerships that we all know well about, just from a storytelling point of view, there's an opportunity to align interests through the chain. So what I've described to you, what I've presented to you, is really that. We have a product, people like it, they buy it, they struggle to find a way to make it work, they engage their creativity, it makes something work, they're then proud of it, we then enable them to share it, we then celebrate them sharing it, we reward them for sharing it. And in the process of rewarding them for sharing it, we're telling everybody else that we care about what they're doing, and we're giving them new ideas. Like, there's no break in the chain, and it ends up on the box, which is saying, you know, this is baked in, this is something on a product level. This is not differentiated from the product. This is not happening on another layer. This is something that's, you know, where all those layers are present. And then when it comes to doing things like Kickstarter, so we launched the Plumin 2 on Kickstarter in January, and we hit our goal and another couple. And, you know, again, tangible response to to those relationships that we've built. And just thinking about other advertising things. I mean, we all know how much advertisers pay for sponsorships and associations, but those associations live in the network in a very real and interesting way. So if you think about advertising campaigns, you can work for 10 years, and if you're lucky, you get somebody to associate your brand or product with one word or one emotion. You've done well if it's like cat food, cuddly cats or something, I don't know. But these things, these associations are taking place everywhere, and actually in a really interesting way. So here's Pinterest, here's the bulb, there's a bunch of other lights, that's an obvious one. This is more of a kind of interiors story. This is wedding dresses and green stuff, I don't really get that one. And this is more of a cardboard theme. And because of the way most of Pinterest stuff is, I'm just using it as one example, because of the way this stuff is consumed and everybody's feed is tailored and unique, everybody's sets of associations are completely personal. So rather than us defining one association, just being completely organic and recognizing that actually it doesn't matter where it fits in the story. And it's actually more powerful if it's personal, because the great thing about things like Pinterest and all the social channels is we tailor and we garden those things so the quality of the feeds are good and have been pre-sorted, and we tend to filter out things that are not credible to us or we're not interested in. So when you see things within your feed, it's kind of almost better than a kind of content feed that marketers talk about a lot. So I think when you look at things like this, it's really easy to dismiss them as kind of mechanical things that aren't participating in the world of communication and marketing. And one day when your startup is like turning over 10 million euros, then you might hire a marketing director and then you'll start marketing. The truth is, it happens right from the get-go, and everything you do is marketing. And this stuff, I would argue, is more powerful than the stuff that you could go and stick on a poster because of all the layeredness to it, and the fact that you're much more likely to be motivated, and your preference is much more likely to be moved by experiencing things through here. So I think that's kind of it. I mean, if I was going to wrap this thing up, I would say that through both my experience of working with corporations and through doing these really kind of relatively small product businesses, I really feel like not only is there great opportunity in a general way, this opportunity to make new things in this kind of incredible tension between these two almost like opposing philosophies and approaches and methodologies, but I also think there's an opportunity and there's a force to make things better. I think if brands and companies refocus on the most meaningful, salient, purposeful things that they do, recognizing that really that's the core to resonating with people, meaning something to people, exciting people, whatever it is, then that's surely better for everybody as well. I mean, that's a great motivation for me. I feel kind of, when I'm in my agency life, I feel a bit like I'm out of the fun action in the startup scene, but at the same time, I think that's a job for us to do to help our clients do that. So yeah, I think that'll wrap it up. And then I am told, in theory, you can ask questions, although apparently you don't.
When you're starting a product, how do you cope with between a statement of the story and the uncertainty of your product? I mean, do you feel unconfident about your product sometimes? And how do you cope between uncertainty on the product and storytelling that's saying that I'm doing the best stuff in the world? Or I don't know if you get the question.
Yeah, I think the question's about... Oh, yeah, cool. Right, thank you. How's that? Yeah, so the question's about how do you go out with something bold and clear, despite the fact that at that moment you're the most uncertain, and how you cope with that. So I would say the first thing for us is moving slowly, and moving slowly enough for everything to catch up to a point. And it depends. I mean, it depends on your character. Some people are brilliant at bullshitting. Some people are very comfortable saying things before they really understand them. Like I'm not. So the first thing, I guess, is figuring out who you are and what makes you tick, and then figuring out what the speed is that you want to go at. So I mean, the Plumen business, we sell in 75 countries. We've been, we launched nearly 4 years ago, and we're still bootstrapped. Now, actually being bootstrapped has meant that we can't run, we launch, 1 or 2 products a year maximum, and even then we can't really exploit them. So we're kind of running a little bit ahead of ourselves, and cash-wise, that's really problematic. If we'd gone to VC very early, we would have had to crank things much faster. But then we would have run into other problems because, our trajectory is towards LEDs and Wi-Fi control and all those things, but the market's not there yet. So we want to run a consumer business that is profitable and really inhabits people's lives and solves this problem. If we'd gone a VC route, we would have had to go very fast, and the market's not there yet. So at some point it was going to, would fall unless we could get it into a Google very quickly. But we didn't really want to do that. We didn't want that as our legacy. So our experience was keep it nice and slow. I mean, that line just fell out of the air when we did the neon thing. I mean, we didn't think that much, that hard about it, actually. And in a way, that kind of, that intuitiveness comes through the line. It's quite naive, but that's what makes it nice. I mean, it's what makes it work. But we weren't sitting there, trying to solve it. It was more like it sort of solved itself in a very little way. And then, I mean, that thing we hung in this exhibition and took a photo of it, and then 3 days later it was a full page in the Times with that line underneath it, and it was all over the internet. And we thought, well, that's a great validation of the concept. Yeah, people seem to want it. It seems to resonate as an idea. We've already kind of claimed that turf. We already had, a day later, it was already the #1 ranked, link for design and energy light bulbs. So anyway, hopefully that answers the question. I think it's about speed. And I would say that if the bits if you're not able to articulate, the core of what you're doing and why you're doing it, you shouldn't be going out there, because you need to let that settle. You need to let it crystallize. Because once you're out there, you've got a whole set of different forces at play, which are, pulling you in lots of different directions. It's very easy for that to unravel. I guess one of the points in this whole presentation is about, one of our great strengths as startups, as challengers, is our story. Is that the core of that story, and about that story against the big convoluted stories that don't really touch us and don't really mean anything, and they're just washing over us, and they're being, they're spending a lot of money meaning very little to us, when what we can be is the counter to that, which is very clear, very strong, but therefore really requiring clarity. So if that clarity doesn't exist, maybe it's just a case of, if you can, putting the brakes on a little bit, stepping off the gas a little bit, maybe asking your investors to go on holiday for a while.
How do you deal when someone's going to post a picture of your lamp and it's just not a pretty picture? It just doesn't put your product in value. How do you deal with all of that and really moderating content, user-generated content about your product or the brands that you represent?
Yeah, so everybody get that question. So it's really a kind of quality control thing. So I mean, we can't do that much, because I mean, we're encouraging people to send us things. I mean, sometimes we have awkward conversations, which is, that looks great, but we can't post it because we don't tell them it's awful. But the thing is, a lot of the stuff that's being circulated is out of our control. I mean, we were doing some work with a UK fashion brand, and we were looking at Pinterest. And the most pinned brand on Pinterest is Chanel. And Chanel don't have their own Pinterest account. It's all inbound pins from, I mean, Chanel have been smart to optimize the on-site, media to be pinned. But, even they figured it out. And the way that you handle it ultimately is, yes, there's a general wash of stuff that's just out there circulating. The truth is, if people like you, and really the reason why people are interested in the imagery is because they want to be excited by things. They're not really interested in the crap stuff, actually. I mean, I've been quite shocked, actually, how motivated people are by a beautiful image. I know it sounds crazy, because there's such a, we've almost learnt that ground up again. So that's one thing. It kind of, the stuff that I see coming around again and again and again in Pinterest is just really beautiful imagery, really interesting story behind it. Man, that Lucramas one with the made out of the bottle, people love like DIY projects, and that one's a really nicely crafted one, really nicely conceived. It's recycled, reclaimed wood. So it's a nice story behind it, nice image. Circulate. Crap image, not very interesting story. It just dies. And the other thing, of course, is we don't say no to people, but we can say yes to them. So when we find something that's cool in Instagram, for instance, then we start communicating them and say, can we post it here? Can we post it there? Can we post it there? Do you want to do something for us? Can you? I mean, there was one with these kind of mesh, these shades around it. That was done by a Japanese designer, and there were vases actually that they just kind of inverted and did it and took a photo, and now they're redesigning them to be a shade, and then when we're going to start distributing them. So, and we've obviously bigged them up and like got a load of excitement around them. So by the time they launch, like there's a whole really, really nice story behind it. But we've kind of shone, I mean, within our, limited means, shone the light on it. So, it's not a punitive thing. It's not about really cutting. It's just about, you've got the natural tendency for the good stuff to rise, actually, supplemented by our attention and, constantly pointing to the examples that we feel really represent the ambitions and the possibilities.
So when it comes to storytelling, I guess there is a balance between authenticity and efficiency that's sometimes hard to overcome. So when it comes to the methodology to execute this storytelling, do you advise a classical iteration process? Do you reshape it according to user feedbacks, or is it mainly based on initial intuitions and you take the time to put it the right way? I mean, is it allowed to fail when it comes to storytelling or not?
Yeah, I mean, it's, for a larger organization, it's quite a big deal to engage with storytelling. And it's a bigger deal when we try to help them reach the conclusion that storytelling is something that happens quite late in the process. What you need to do first is really figure out some territories that are true in some way, shape, or form. And if it's not true, kind of invent the thing that makes it true. What that means for their organization to solve that stuff. Also, stuff like intelligence is really important. What you're going to write about, and where does that intelligence come from? If you're just writing about what everybody else is writing about, then why are people going to engage in the first place? So there's loads of stuff to overcome there to start with, and it really, ultimately, it really comes down to, again, what is their brand? And when you ask the question, what's in the brand that's interesting that we can talk about constantly, and on an ongoing basis, sustainably, it's a very different question from what's in the brand that I can make an advert about and what I can make a poster about. It's a very different set of demands, and therein lies a lot of tension. At the end of the process, and it's really, really late in the process, you're starting to talk about optimization and efficacy, because at that point, and the reason why, in a way, as you know already, efficacy will only be a gauge within the parameters that are already set. So if you've already made all the wrong decisions by the time you get to testing, you're going to, your testing range is only going to give you, that range within something that's already broken, whilst going all the way back to the front and saying, well, what can we do that's really rich? Maybe fork some paths then and then test a bigger range, then you'll get some better responses. The other big problem, and we've encountered it a few times in our agency setting, is it takes a long time. I mean, it's like products, right? I mean, content is much like products, which is, it only really starts to make sense as a kind of media equation in terms of investment and costs associated with production versus paying for attention. It only balances when you've got a community of critical mass, and that can take a long time. And that's really the biggest hurdle is getting to a point where it's it all balances. And actually, every subsequent piece of investment, you're starting to see those costs diminish per user and engagement. But that's again, that can be years and very few organizations and marketing directors are comfortable seeing those outgoings with nothing coming back for and again, like I was saying earlier, they tend to be in for 6 months and out again anyway, so they want to see some returns within their tenure so they can, trade up for the next CMO position. But it's another reason why I think we have such an the startup community have such an advantage, because we are committed. We can't help but be committed, and we're doing it. We've made a choice to do what we do because we're excited about it. And because that story is so strong and compelling, we've sacrificed so much to be doing what we're doing. It's a natural consequence of that position that we have a story that's compelling and interesting. It's just a case of how do you make sure that you're building in the, structurally you're building in those, the channels and the, but also on a sort of organizational front, that you're doing that work, that you have people looking at those channels, creating content, looking at what works, what doesn't work, looking at optimizing practice. We only, the product side of it's been going for 10 years. We only really hired our first marketing person in September to do that stuff. It's terrible, but the value comes back pretty quickly. And again, in terms of, versus my agency work, the amount of energy you need to put in to get a lot back is much less because everything else is so aligned, which is why it's, it's a real shame to overlook it. I think in London it feels like the startup community have finally engaged, sort of accepted design is important, but they haven't quite got around to marketing. Marketing is a dirty word, and they're doing startups because they hate marketing. And yet, there's some very, it's important, bridges to cross before you get to that point. I was talking to Erica earlier about we worked with Skype for 3 years between their eBay acquisition and the Microsoft acquisition, so 3 billion, increase. And, we got involved just at the point where they started, they were too big to be a kind of growth hacking business anymore. So they had to go out and hire like a kind of corporate marketing person, but that ruined it. It really destroyed a lot of the equity they'd created because they didn't know how to take those stories forward. And it became a kind of, it was crazy time. It wasn't enjoyable at all because we were just watching this brand being destroyed. But anyway, that's a very, very, very long answer, and I'm sure that's about 4 questions worth, and maybe it's time to hand off.
Thank you very much.
Get